Liam Vance was a man who lived in the static. As a late-night radio technician in the isolated town of Oakhaven, his life was defined by the hum of cooling fans and the rhythmic pulse of signal monitors. He liked the silence of the 2 a.m. shift. It was honest. One Tuesday night, while recalibrating the transmitter, Liam stumbled upon a ghost. A thin, serrated needle of sound pierced through the white noise. It wasn't on any assigned band. It sat exactly at 99.8 megahertz, a frequency that was supposed to be a dead zone in this county. Liam adjusted the dial. At first, it was just a low, wet thumping, like a heavy heart beating inside a metal box. Then came the voice. It didn't sound like it was coming through a microphone. It sounded like it was being whispered directly into the back of his skull. "The house is empty, but the shadows are full," the voice rasped. It was a woman's voice, but the pacing was wrong. Too many syllables crowded together, then long, agonizing pauses. "Who is this?" Liam muttered, leaning toward the console. He checked his monitors. The signal wasn't coming from tower. It was coming from inside the station walls. Suddenly, the studio's thermal camera flickered. In the corner of the room, where there was nothing but a stack of old amplifiers, the screen showed a heat signature. It was a tall, jagged shape, standing perfectly still. The temperature in that corner was reading minus 10 degrees Celsius. Liam turned around. The corner was empty, but when he looked back at the monitor, the shape had moved. It was now standing directly behind his chair. A cold, gray hand, fingers too long and lacking nails, slowly entered his field of vision from behind. The radio in the studio shrieked, "Don't turn around, Liam. We like the way you look from the front." Liam froze, his heart hammering against his ribs. The smell of ozone and rotting lilies filled the room. He didn't turn around. He did something worse. He looked at the reflection in the glass of the soundproof window. Behind him, there was a figure draped in what looked like wet television static. It had no face, only a vertical slit that hummed with a soft blue light. The station's lights died. In the darkness, the only thing Liam could see was the glowing on air sign, which had turned a bruised, sickly purple. Liam didn't remember driving home. He only remembered the sensation of cold air rushing through his lungs and the static-filled voice echoing in his ears. When he finally pulled into his driveway, his hands were trembling so violently he could barely pull the key from the ignition. He sat in his kitchen, the lights turned up to their highest setting. He needed to hear a human voice, any voice that wasn't a distorted frequency. He grabbed his phone and called his sister, Ava, who lived 3 blocks away. The phone rang once, twice, then a click. "Ava, thank God. Something happened at the station. I think I'm losing it," Liam stammered. There was silence on the other end. Then, a sound like a skipping record. "Liam, I can't see the walls." "Ava, what are you talking about?" "The color is gone, Liam. Everything is turning into lines, like a screen that's been smashed." Suddenly, her voice shifted. It became that same serrated, metallic rasp from the radio. "Frequency 99.8. Tune in, Liam. We are all waiting in the pixels." The line went dead. Liam sprinted to his car and drove to Ava's house. He found her front door wide open. Inside, the lights were on, but they were pulsing in a rhythmic pattern. 3 long flashes, 3 short ones. "SOS. Ava," Liam shouted, running into the living room. He stopped dead. Ava was there, sitting on the sofa, but she didn't look solid. Her body was flickering, like a low-quality hologram. 1 second she was clear, the next she was a blur of horizontal black and white lines. "Liam," she whispered. Her voice sounded thin, as if it were being transmitted from a great distance. He reached out to touch her shoulder, but his hand passed right through her. It felt like sticking his arm into a cloud of freezing needles. A sharp jolt of electricity surged through his arm, leaving a numb, static-like tingle in his fingertips. "What is happening to you?" Liam cried. "I'll listen to the radio, Liam," she said, her eyes filling with tears that looked like tiny, glowing LEDs. "The late-night show. You weren't on. It was just the Static Man. He told me that our world is just a broadcast, and he's finally changing the channel." As she spoke, a section of the living room wall behind her simply disappeared. It didn't break or fall. It just dissolved into a swarm of gray pixels, revealing a void of pure, humming darkness behind it. "Run, Liam," Ava said, her lower half now completely vanished into the static. "The signal is spreading. If you stay in the light, he can find your coordinates. Go to the basement. Go where the signal can't reach." With a final, distorted screech, Ava vanished. On the sofa where she sat, only a small, handheld transistor radio remained. It was turned to 99.8 megahertz. One down, the radio whispered, 7 billion to go. Liam didn't stay to watch the rest of Ava's house dissolve. He backed out of the room as the carpet beneath his feet began to fray into digital white noise. He scrambled into his car, the engine turning over with a pained electric whine. As he tore down the main street of Oakhaven, the town looked like a corrupted video file. A street lamp flickered and then froze, its light hanging in the air like a solid, glowing spear. A stray dog crossed the road, but its legs moved in a repetitive, three-frame loop. A siren wailed, not the rhythmic rise and fall of a police car, but a flat, continuous tone. A black sedan with tinted windows swerved in front of Liam, forcing him to slam on the brakes. A man stepped out. He wore a heavy trench coat and a hat pulled low, but what caught Liam's eye were his glasses. The lenses were made of thick, dark lead. "Get in," the man barked, gesturing to the sedan. "Unless you want to be part of the background noise when the refresh rate hits 0. Liam didn't argue. He jumped into the passenger seat. The interior of the car was lined with copper mesh and strange, vibrating tuning forks. "I'm Detective Miller," the man said, his voice gravelly. He didn't look at Liam. He kept his eyes on a specialized radar mounted on the dashboard. It didn't show roads. It showed waves of purple energy. "And you're the idiot who let the static man into the transmitter." "I didn't let him in," Liam shouted. He was already there. He was inside the frequency. "He's been inside the Earth for eons, kid," Miller said, flooring the accelerator. The radio station was just a megaphone. Oakhaven was built over a dead spot, a place where the fabric of reality is thin. In 1940, they built the first tower there to try and talk to God. They didn't find God. They found a signal that was bored of being silent. Miller handed Liam a heavy, lead-line headset. "Put these on. They'll dampen the resonance. If you hear the hum for more than 5 minutes, your brain cells start to reformat into binary code." "Where are we going?" Liam asked, his voice muffled by the headset. "To the source. The basement of your station." "But not the basement, you know." Miller checked his watch. The hands were spinning backward. The station was built on an old signal vault. The founders were part of a cult called the Acolytes of the Void. They believed that reality is just a dream being broadcast by a sleeping entity. The static man? He's the alarm clock. Suddenly, the sedan's windshield cracked. Not from a rock, but from a sound. A massive, sky-filling roar of static descended upon them. Ahead of them, the radio tower on the hill was no longer a structure of steel. It had become a giant, jagged tear in the sky, leaking a violet, flickering darkness that was pouring over the town like a digital flood. "Look," Liam pointed. In the middle of the road stood a group of people. They were the townspeople, the baker, the mailman, the children. They were all standing perfectly still, their mouths open, emitting a synchronized 60-cycle hum. Their eyes had been replaced by glowing blue slits. "They're not people anymore," Miller hissed, pulling out a flare gun loaded with a bright green phosphorus. "They're repeaters, and they just found our signal." Miller slammed the car into gear, swerving around a group of repeaters who stood like statues in the middle of the intersection. As the car sped past, Liam saw their skin. It wasn't skin anymore. It looked like the matte texture of an old television screen, and beneath the surface, tiny gray ants of static seemed to be crawling. "Don't look at them," Miller yelled, firing a green flare into the air. The bright phosphorus light seemed to momentarily re-solidify the air, slowing down the encroaching violet darkness. "If you make eye contact, you synchronize. Once you're in sync, you're gone." They reached the station, but it was barely recognizable. The building was pulsating, its dimensions stretching and shrinking like a breathing lump. The on-air sign wasn't just purple now. It was a color Liam didn't have a name for, a hue that made his teeth ache. Miller grabbed a heavy sledgehammer from the trunk and a canister of liquid nitrogen. "Follow me. Stay in my shadow. My coat is lined with silver lead alloy. It creates a quiet zone." They sprinted inside. The hallway Liam had walked 1,000 times was now a labyrinth of shifting geometry. The floor felt like wet sponge. They reached the elevator, but Miller bypassed it, heading for a heavy steel hatch hidden behind a stack of rusted filing cabinets in the grate. "This is it," Miller grunted, pouring the liquid nitrogen over the ancient lock. With one massive swing of the sledgehammer, the frozen metal shattered. They descended a spiral staircase that felt miles deep. The air grew thick with the smell of ozone and burnt copper. At the bottom, they entered a massive circular chamber. In the center stood a machine from 1944, a towering wall of vacuum tubes, spinning magnetic tape reels, and glowing emerald dials. "The archetype," Miller whispered. The first transmitter. On the wall, a series of photographs were pinned. They showed the station's founders, men in lab coats with their eyes stitched shut. Below the photos was a transcription of the first message received in 1944. "The universe is a song that has stayed on the same note for too long. We're the discord. We are the silence between the words." Liam approached the main console. On a small monitor, a waveform was moving. It wasn't a standard sine wave. It was shaped like a series of screaming mouths. "Miller, look." Liam pointed to the tape reel. It was spinning, but there was no tape. The machine was recording directly onto the air itself. Suddenly, the vacuum tubes began to glow with a blinding white light. A voice exploded from the speakers. Not the raspy whisper of the Static Man, but a choir of billions of voices, all screaming in perfect, terrifying harmony. "We are the lost broadcast. We are the memories you deleted to make room for reality." It's not a monster, Liam realized, his hands hovering over the dials. It's a storage drive. The Static Man is just the interface. This machine is dumping every forgotten, failed version of the universe back into our world. And our world doesn't have enough disk space to hold it, Miller said, his face pale. That's why everything is flickering. We're being overwritten. Just then, the hatch above them blew open. A flood of violet static poured down the stairs, and at the center of the swarm was a figure. It was the Static Man, but he was larger now, his body composed of millions of tiny, flickering faces. Liam's neighbors, his co-workers, and Ava. Ava's face appeared on the entity's shoulder, her digital eyes weeping pixels. "Liam, help us. The signal is so loud." The Static Man raised a hand, and the heavy lead-lined headphones on Liam's head began to melt. The air in the vault became thick, like walking through heavy syrup. Every time the Static Man moved, the sound of 1,000 radio stations being tuned at once tore through the room. Liam felt his own skin beginning to tingle, the sensation of pins and needles spreading from his fingertips to his chest. He looked down and saw his reflection in a polished brass dial. His edges were blurring. He was starting to flicker. "He's not just here to kill us, Liam," Miller shouted over the roar of the choir. He lunged for the console, throwing a series of heavy copper switches. He needs a local host, a human who knows the frequency by heart to act as a bridge for the global relay. The Static Man stepped forward. The millions of tiny faces on his skin shifted and screamed in unison. The Ava face on his shoulder reached out a digital hand. "Liam, give in. The noise is so beautiful. There is no more pain in the static. Don't listen to her," Miller yelled. He pulled a heavy, metallic canister from his trench coat. It was a high-frequency EMP, electromagnetic pulse grenade, but it was rigged with a manual trigger. "If I set this off, it'll fry every electronic in this vault, including the archetype. But it'll fry us, too. Our nervous systems won't survive the surge." The Static Man let out a horizontal wave of blue energy. It hit Miller, sending him flying across the room. Miller's lead-lined coat sparked and smoked. He slumped against the wall, the EMP grenade rolling across the floor toward the abyss of the central pit. Liam was alone. The static man loomed over him, the vertical slit in his face glowing with a blinding, pulsating rhythm. Liam felt a strange pull, not a physical force, but a mental one. His memories were being indexed. He saw his 5th birthday, his first day at the radio station, the smell of Ava's perfume. All of it was being converted into data. You are the perfect conductor. The static man vibrated. Through you, the broadcast will reach the cores of every living cell. Liam's hand moved involuntarily toward the master gain lever on a 1944 console. His fingers, now semi-transparent, gripped the cold steel. No, Liam hissed, his teeth feeling like they were made of glass. He looked at the waveform monitor. Amidst the screaming mouths of the void signal, he saw something else. A tiny, steady flat line at the very bottom of the spectrum. It was a frequency so low it was almost silent. 0.1 hertz. The frequency of a resting human heart. He realized the archive, this massive dump of forgotten realities, couldn't handle silence. It was built on noise. It was built on information. Miller, the EMP won't work. Liam screamed, fighting the static man's control over his arm. It'll just create more static. We don't need to break the machine. We need to mute it. Miller, coughing up a gray, metallic fluid, looked up. The grounding wire. Under the main coil, if you cut the input and loop the output, you create a feedback silence. The static man realized the threat. He lunged, his fingers extending into jagged shards of glass-like pixels. Liam didn't pull the lever up. He slammed it down, past the OFF position, into a hidden notch labeled isolation. At the same time, he grabbed a heavy copper wrench and dove under the console, reaching for the thick, pulsating grounding wire. The static man's hand pierced through Liam's shoulder. It didn't bleed, it hummed. Liam's vision turned into a kaleidoscope of TV snow. Stop, the entity commanded. Liam ignored the pain that felt like liquid lightning. With one final, desperate burst of strength, he clamped the wrench onto the wire and twisted. The moment the wrench twisted the grounding wire, the world didn't explode. It stuttered. The screaming choir of billions vanished instantly, replaced by a silence so heavy it felt like being buried under 10 feet of snow. The violet light of the static man turned a dull, sickly gray. The entity froze mid-lunge, its hand still buried in Liam's shoulder, but the movement had stopped. Liam looked around. Miller was frozen in mid-cough, a globule of metallic fluid hanging suspended in the air. A spar from a short-circuited panel was stuck in space, a tiny, jagged star of gold. They were trapped in a frozen frame. The split second between the broadcast and the silence. "You have delayed the inevitable," a voice said. It didn't come from the static man's mouth. It came from the air itself, vibrating through Liam's skin. Liam realized he could move, but it was like moving through thick gelatin. He pulled himself away from the static man's hand. Where the wound should have been, there was only a hole showing the static-filled sky of Oakhaven, as if he were becoming a window to the outside world. "What are you?" Liam whispered. The static man's form began to shift. The millions of faces stopped screaming and turned to look at Liam. They merged, flattening out, until the entity looked like a tall, thin man made of old newspaper clippings and magnetic tape. "I am the archive's shadow," the entity replied. "Everything that was never chosen to be real is stored in me. The dinosaurs that didn't die, the civilizations that never rose, the sister who was never born. We are the waste products of your reality's evolution. You're destroying us," Liam said, his voice echoing in the void. "We are reclaiming the space. Your universe is a tiny island in an ocean of discarded data. The broadcast is simply the tide coming in." Liam looked at the console. The needle on the 0.1 hertz dial was trembling. The mute wasn't permanent. It was a dam holding back a collapsing mountain. If you take over everything that makes us us, our memories, our love, our history, it all becomes noise to you, Liam argued. "Noise is just information you don't understand," the archive shadow countered. It stepped toward the grounding wire. I will restore the connection, but I will offer you a deal, conductor. Give me the master frequency, the core of your species' consciousness, and I will allow you and the woman called Ava to exist in a subroutine. A perfect, eternal loop of your best memory. Liam looked at Miller, still frozen, and then thought of Ava flickering into nothingness. He could save her. He could live forever in a digital heaven while the rest of the world turned into white noise. But then he looked at the grounding wire. It wasn't just metal. It was covered in the dust of Oakhaven, the sweat of Miller, and the blood of the founders. It was real. It was messy, painful, and short, but it was real. A loop isn't a life, Liam hissed. It's just a recording. Liam grabbed the silver lead coat from Miller's frozen body. He knew the silver was a conductor for the quiet he had created. He wrapped it around his arm and reached for the main vacuum tube of the archetype, the heart of the broadcast. If you break the tube, the feedback will erase you from the logs, the shadow warned, its voice losing its calm. You will not just die. You will have never existed. Liam smiled, his teeth now translucent. Then there will be nothing for you to broadcast. Will there? Liam's fingers brushed the glass of the main vacuum tube. It was burning hot, yet it pulsed with a rhythmic, icy vibration. The moment he made contact, the frozen frame shattered. Time rushed back in a violent torrent. Miller finished his cough and slumped to the floor. The sparks flew, and the static man let out a roar of white noise that cracked the concrete walls of the vault. Liam, don't! Miller screamed, realizing what Liam was doing. If you shatter the core while you're synchronized, you'll be pulled into the stream. You'll be scattered across the frequencies. It's the only way to delete the source. Liam yelled back. The static man lunged, but he was too late. Liam slammed the heavy copper wrench into the glass tube. There was no sound of breaking glass. Instead, there was a sound of a world being unzipped. A blinding, violet vortex erupted from the center of the archetype, acting like a massive vacuum cleaner for reality. Liam didn't fall. He was uploaded. He felt his physical body dissolve into a billion points of light. He was no longer a man. He was a sequence of code. He was flying through a tunnel of infinite flickering images, thousands of versions of Oakhaven. In one, the town was under an ocean. In another, it was made of gold. In a third, it was a burning wasteland. You are trespassing in the unwritten, the archive shadow's voice boomed. The entity was no longer a man shape. It was the tunnel itself, its walls made of the faces of the discarded. Liam realized he was inside the data stream, the raw highway of the broadcast. He saw Ava. She was floating in a pocket of static, her form slowly being dismantled by tiny, glowing geometric shapes. Ava! He tried to shout, but his voice was a frequency. He swam through the data, fighting the current of forgotten history. Every time a memory touched him, he felt a part of himself vanish. He forgot his mother's face. He forgot the name of his first dog. The archive was eating his data to make room for his arrival. T.O. delete the archive. You must find the header, a voice whispered. It was Miller's voice, but it was coming from the lead line coat Liam was still clutching. The silver in the coat was acting as a filter, protecting a small part of Liam's consciousness. Liam saw it at the end of the tunnel, a giant, glowing obsidian cube that served as the master header. Every failed reality, every monster, and every bit of static was indexed there. But standing in front of the cube was the purest form of the static man, a towering pillar of absolute blackness that absorbed all life. It wasn't made of static. It was the source of the silence. As Liam approached, his legs disappeared. Then his torso. He was down to a single flickering thought. I'm the technician, Liam whispered to himself, a mantra to keep from dissolving. I'm the one who turns the dial. He reached the obsidian cube. He didn't have hands anymore, but he had the silver lead fabric. He draped the quiet over the master header. The black pillar shrieked. The sound was so loud it began to tear the data stream apart. The images of the other worlds began to catch fire and burn into black ash. If you delete US, you delete her, the shadow screamed, pointing at the fading image of Ava. The master header pulsed under the silver lead fabric like a trapped heart. The data stream was screaming. Liam could feel his own identity fraying at the edges. He no longer remembered his last name or the color of his own eyes. All that remained was the mission and the flickering image of Ava, drifting further into the burning pixels. Choose. The pillar of silence vibrated. The girl or the reality. You cannot rewrite the past without erasing the future. Liam's consciousness reached out, touching the cold, obsidian surface of the cube. As he did, a surge of foreign data flooded his mind. It wasn't the archive's noise. It was something older, a legacy of safety code buried deep within the archetype's original 1944 blueprints. He saw a name in the metadata, Thorn. Before the radio station was built, the land had belonged to a family that dealt with a different kind of darkness, liquids and wells. When the engineers built the transmitter, they had unknowingly tapped into the same dead spot the Thorns had guarded. One of the early technicians, a man who feared the void, had programmed a hidden partition, a digital safe room designed to hold a backup of the world's core frequencies in case of a total system crash. Ava isn't just data, Liam realized, his thoughts vibrating at a high frequency. She's a signature. Liam stopped trying to delete the cube. Instead, he began to reformat it. He used the silver lead fabric to shield his final thought, the memory of Ava's laugh. He pushed that memory into the hidden partition, using it as an encryption key. If he could move the souls of the trapped people into this protected space, the archive could burn, but the essence of Oakhaven would remain. The pillar of silence lunged. Its blackness swirled around Leo, trying to choke out his light. You are attempting to steal from the void. I'm not stealing. Liam's voice echoed like a million radio towers. I'm just changing the channel. Liam grabbed the Ava data and shoved it into the partition. He felt the archive's gravity try and pull her back, but the silver shield held. Then he reached out for the rest of the town. Miller, the baker, the children, pulling their flickering signals out of the static man's skin and into the safe zone. But there was a catch. The partition required a constant power source to stay closed. Someone had to stay behind to hold the doors shut from the inside of the stream. Someone had to be the battery. Miller, Liam shouted into the void. A fragment of Miller's consciousness appeared near the cube. The detective's form was barely a shadow now. I see it, kid. The partition. It's a lifeboat. Go with them, Miller. Liam commanded. No. Miller's voice was steady. I've been hunting this ghost for 20 years. I'm tired of running. You're the technician, Liam. You need to be on the outside to rebuild the world when the static clears. I'll hold the door. Miller, you'll be trapped in a digital loop forever. Better a loop than a deletion, Miller said, his shadow hand gripping the edge of the partition. Now, hit the delete key. With a roar of static, Liam channeled every remaining bit of his energy into the master header. He didn't just mute it. He commanded the archive to self-terminate. Liam didn't wake up. He was rendered back into existence. He found himself lying on the cold concrete floor of the radio station's vault. The massive archetype machine was silent. The vacuum tubes were shattered, their glass shards scattered like diamonds across the floor. The air was no longer thick with ozone. It was thin, sharp, and carried the scent of fresh rain. Miller, Liam croaked. There was no answer. The detective's trench coat lay in a heap near the console, empty. The silver lead lining was scorched black. Liam dragged himself up the spiral stairs, his limbs feeling heavy and disconnected, like a puppet with loose strings. When he pushed open the hatch and stepped out into Oakhaven, he stopped in his tracks. The town was back. The houses were solid, the street lamps were made of metal again, and the sky was a clear, pre-dawn blue. But something was horribly wrong. The people of Oakhaven were standing exactly where they had been when the overriding started. The baker was on the sidewalk. The mailman was by his truck. A group of children stood by the school bus. But they were blanks. Their faces were smooth, featureless expanses of skin. No eyes, no mouths, no expressions. They stood perfectly still, their chests rising and falling in a slow, synchronized rhythm. They were like new computers with no operating system installed. The bodies were hardware, but the souls were still trapped in the hidden partition inside the broken machine. "I have to get them back," Liam whispered. He ran to his car. It was no longer a rusted wreck. It was pristine, as if it had just come off the assembly line. He reached for the radio. He turned the dial to 99.8 megahertz. Silence. "Come on, Miller. Give me a sign," Liam pleaded. A faint, rhythmic clicking started. "Dot, dot, dot. Dash, dash, dash. Morse code. PRTITON LOCKED," the radio whispered. "NADKY." Liam realized that during the collapse, the partition had sealed itself to protect the souls from the archive's destruction. To open it, he didn't need a frequency. He needed a physical bridge. He looked at his own hands. They were pale, and beneath the skin, faint lines of blue light still pulsed. He was the only person who had been uploaded and downloaded successfully. He was the living bridge. He drove to the center of town, to the old clock tower that sat directly above the geographical center of the dead spot. He climbed the stairs to the top, carrying a portable transmitter he had grabbed from the station. He wired the transmitter into the clock tower's massive copper bells. He needed to turn the entire tower into a giant tuning fork. "Ava, can you hear me?" Liam shouted into the microphone, his voice trembling. "I'm opening the door." He sliced his palm, the same hand that had touched the master header, and pressed it against the cold copper of the bell. As his blood touched the metal, the blue light in his veins surged outward. The bell didn't ring with a sound. It rang with a memory. Suddenly, the air around the clock tower began to shimmer. A localized data stream opened, a golden thread connecting the tower to the sky. Liam felt the weight of the partition. He felt the millions of souls pressing against his consciousness, desperate to come home. But the source of the silence, the black pillar, wasn't entirely gone. A shadow began to creep up the walls of the clock tower. The archive had left a virus behind, a final defense mechanism to prevent the restoration. "I can't hold it alone," Liam screamed, his body beginning to smoke from the electrical pressure. The shadow virus climbed the clock tower like a living oil spill. It wasn't just darkness, it was anti-information. Everywhere it touched, the stones of the tower turned into meaningless gray blocks, losing their texture and weight. Liam felt the cold grip of the virus at his ankles, trying to unwrite his very existence. "You're just a remnant," Liam screamed at the rising shadow. "The archive is dead. The archive is never dead." The shadows hissed in 1,000 distorted voices. "As long as there is silence, we are there. We are the gap between your thoughts." Liam looked at the golden thread of data pouring from the sky into the bell. He could see the files of the townspeople, the faces of children, the memories of old men, sliding down the beam, trying to find their blank bodies. But the virus was clogging the path, corrupting the souls as they descended. "I have to be the filter," Liam realized. He didn't pull his hand away from the copper bell. Instead, he gripped it tighter. He opened his mind, not to the gold, but to the blackness. He invited the virus into his own body. "Oh, what are you doing?" Miller's voice echoed from the transmitter, frantic and distant. "I'm a technician, Miller." Liam gasped as his eyes turned into swirling pools of ink. "I am grounded. If I take the virus into me, the signal stays pure for them." Liam became a human lightning rod. The black shadow surged into his chest, filling his lungs with the taste of dead air. It was agonizing. It felt like every memory he had was being shredded by a billion tiny razors. But as the darkness filled him, the golden thread became brilliant and clear. Down in the streets, the blanks began to change. The baker's face rippled like water, and suddenly his eyes snapped open, bright blue and human. The mailman gasped, clutching his chest as his heart rediscovered its rhythm. One by one, the people of Oakhaven re-rendered, their souls snapping back into their physical shells. Liam saw Ava. She stood at the base of the clock tower, her face finally solid, her eyes looking up in horror. "Liam," she screamed. Liam was now a silhouette of pure static. He was the only unreal thing left in a real world. The tower beneath him was beginning to dissolve into the void he had absorbed. "The broadcast is over," Liam whispered. With a final, violent surge of will, Liam pushed the last of the souls, the soul of Detective Miller, out of his mind and into the golden stream. He felt Miller's consciousness resist, trying to stay and help, but Liam forced him out. "Live, Miller. Tell the story," Liam thought. Then, Liam let go of the bell. The golden thread snapped. The virus, now trapped entirely within Liam's fading form, imploded. There was no explosion, only a soft pop, like a light bulb burning out. The clock tower stood silent. The top floor was empty. Only a small, handheld radio remained on the floor, its screen cracked and dark. Oakhaven became known as the town that slept. The residents remembered nothing of the flickering or the static. To them, it was just a long, dreamless night. Except for two people. Ava stayed in Oakhaven. She took over the radio station, but she never played music. Every night at 2 a.m., she sat in the booth and broadcasted a single, low-frequency hum, the sound of a resting heart. She hoped that somewhere in the vast ocean of data, her brother might hear it and find his way back to the shore of reality. Detective Miller disappeared from public life. People say an old man in a lead line coat can be seen wandering the highways, carrying a specialized radar. He isn't looking for ghosts. He's looking for quiet spots. He knows that the archive is still out there, waiting in the static between the channels. And sometimes, on a very cold night, if you tune your radio to 99.8 megahertz, you won't hear music or news. You'll hear the sound of a wrench turning and a distant, peaceful voice saying, "Signal clear. We are still here." The end.